It's an impenetrable wall of grey. A solitary lion stands no chance, but the whole pride is here. They have allies. There are 30 of them.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening around the world. I'm Luiza Savage, your moderator for China versus Democracy, the greatest game. Politico is delighted to be a media partner of the Halifax International Security Summit, and I'm delighted to introduce this distinguished panel. Emily Lau is the former Democratic Party member of the Hong Kong Legislative Council and former chairperson of the Democratic Party, and she is joining us from Hong Kong. Welcome, Emily. Senator Chris Coons is the recently re-elected Democratic senator from Delaware, and he's joining us from Delaware. Liam Fox is a member of Parliament in the UK House of Commons and a former Defense Secretary and International Trade Secretary, and he's joining us from the United Kingdom. Welcome. As many of you know, the Halifax Security Forum just published an entire handbook entitled China versus Democracy. And it was an epic effort by the forum's vice president, Robin Shepard, in which he interviewed more than 250 experts around the world. And it's available for download on the forum's website. The thesis of this report is that this year, 2020, witnessed a paradigm shift in the world's understanding of China. That China has emerged as, quote, the most powerful authoritarian state in history and a major challenger to the liberal world. The report calls for a sober rethink of the policies of democratic countries, which it asserts have been based on a foreign policy miscalculation of historic proportions. But this is a panel not just of thinkers, but of doers. So the question for today's discussion is what comes next? What should democracies do next, and what will they do in the coming year? What steps can they take to protect their own values and to keep the world safe for democracy? So I'd like to kick off our panel with a very specific question. What is one specific step that you see democracies taking in the next 12 months to respond to this challenge? Who will do it? When will they do it? And what will be the forum? And I'd love to start with Senator Chris Coons.
Well, thank you, Luiza, and thank you to the Halifax International Security Forum and Peter von Prague, and thank you to my fellow participants in this panel for joining us. Emily Lau from Hong Kong and Dr. Fox from the United Kingdom. First, I think we need to show that in the United States, we can be the best version of ourselves. We have to tackle this pandemic, get a handle on it, and successfully show that we can follow the best science, follow public health guidelines, and solve the problems confronting our people, and rejoin with our critical and trusted allies in mobilizing the global response to this pandemic. We're at a critical turning point. I agree with the premise of your question and with the Halifax Forum's report that we've made a miscalculation of historic proportions with regards to China. President Trump has stood up to China, but not in the most effective or coordinated way. I am hopeful that President-elect Biden, working from his long experience in foreign policy, will bring us back together as a nation here in the United States, rejoin and re-energize our global network of allies, and demonstrate first in how we respond to this pandemic, the sort of global science-based public health leadership that the United States had long shown on the world stage.
Thank you, Senator. And we will ask you to give us more of your insights into what we can expect from the next administration as we go along here. But I'd love to turn it over to Liam Fox.
Well, I think that I very much agree with Senator Coons in his basic premise, and I'd also like to thank Peter and Robin for the tremendous work that they put into this and for inviting us. And I was remembering just a couple of days ago that when I was Defense Secretary, I was in a conversation in the Elysee Palace. And I was asking why in the Cold War we used the term better so much, that we believed that freedom was better than totalitarianism, that democracy was better than communism, free markets were better than command economy, but that we have tended to not use it. And this was in the context of Islamic fundamentalism. And I said, surely we believe that religious freedom is better than imposed orthodoxy. Men and women being equal is better than imposed theocracy. And the answer was quite depressing. The answer came back was, I don't think today we can use the word better. I think we have to use the word different. And I think that is a symbol of the weakness, the moral weakness that is all too apparent, I think, sometimes in Western discourse. If we don't believe that what we stand for is better, if we don't believe in the rule of law, democracy, freedom, and we believe that those are better than the alternatives, why should anyone else listen to us? And I think that one of the first things that we have to do is to reassert our belief in our core values in the West. We have to recognize that there is a battle of ideas and a battle of ideals, and we have to show that we are up to the test, because everything that China does in every international sphere is a test of our resolve. And I'm afraid that our resolve has rather been found to be wanting in some aspects in recent years. And it's time that we understood that we need to make the case for our values. We need to believe in them. And if we don't, who other will make that case, and who will therefore believe us? So I think that where we have to start in all of this is reinforcing our core self-belief that what we stand for in the world is a better way, not just a different way.
Emily Lau, from where you sit in Hong Kong, does it seem that democracies are losing their resolve? And is that model of democracy not as attractive as it once was compared to what we see China doing economically, in COVID, militarily?
Well, thank you, Luiza. And I want to thank the Halifax Forum for inviting me to speak. And I was in Halifax last year. I have very fond memories. And speaking from Hong Kong, of course, we are, as you all know, we are in the forefront of this China challenge. We are a tiny city. Many of you have been here and you like Hong Kong. And now we are sort of disappearing before the world's eyes. What is disappearing? Our freedom, our personal safety, the rule of law. And what can we do? Well, of course, we appeal to Beijing, which doesn't get us anywhere. So that's why we appeal to the international community, the democracies. I don't know whether they are disappearing fast, but we hope the democracies, people with similar core values, can work together and to persuade, to get China to be reasonable, to honor the Sino-British Joint Declaration and all other international treaties that China has signed and will sign. So in Hong Kong, we look at it from a very personal perspective and not a big global perspective. But the way China treats Hong Kong will be very indicative to the whole world how China will behave, because China has made a promise in 1984. They signed it with Maggie Thatcher. And now it seems that promise is disappearing. And many Hong Kong people are very, very fearful. They are very frightened. Many are trying to flee. So look at the 7 million people here. Look at the way that China treats us. If China cannot keep and will not keep the promise, then how can China act as a responsible, respectable member of the international community?
Well, Emily Lau, it was only a year ago when we were all in Halifax and witnessed you receiving an award from the Forum on behalf of the pro-democracy movement of Hong Kong and the people of Hong Kong. In that year that has passed, have democracies been there for you, or have they let you down?
Well, I must say that in the last year and more, we've had a lot of international coverage, exposure. Some countries were quite jealous because their situation were far worse than Hong Kong. And I thank the international community, but that does not seem to be enough. And you talk about last year, and look at the situation now. The people of Hong Kong, those who voted for the pro-democracy politicians, they have been disenfranchised. There is no more opposition in the Hong Kong legislature. Our election, which was supposed to be held in September, was cancelled, maybe postponed for a year, maybe longer. So, and the national security law has been imposed on us. So many things have happened since I was in Halifax last year. So, what have the democracies around the world done to help Hong Kong? They have done something, they have said something, but it's not enough. And it's not just helping to save Hong Kong. It's just showing that democracy can work together to preserve the core values. And when you see tiny, vibrant, and free Hong Kong maybe about to sink to the bottom of the Victoria Harbour, I hope the democracies can do more to help us.
Well, thank you. And we're going to dig in this conversation about what they can do and what next steps look like. But first, I'd like to share a video. Robin Shepherd was able to talk to several other people around the world about this subject. So let's listen in.
Governments need to do their part. Here in Halifax, the Canadian government has done really good work. The Australians, many countries have stepped up to their responsibilities, and they've done so with a response from China that has been cost imposing on them. It's not free to stand up to China. China wants to make sure they set examples around the world so that other countries won't challenge them. But when we move outside of the government realm to private sector actors, to non-governmental organizations, to private business, many of whom make a great deal of money. Those are American businesses that do that as well. Each of them has a moral responsibility as well to think through what it is, the activities their companies are engaged in, and whether that's in their own host country's best national security interest. I was a business guy for an awfully long time. I know my mission was to respond to my shareholders' demands and make sure I took care of my team and my employees there as well and their families. But in the end, we all have responsibility as citizens as well. We're asking them to step up and make sure they understand what it is they're doing and they're comfortable with the activities with which they're engaged.
I think that this is going to be more the wave of the future. I think that we are going to see these agile alignments, partnerships, where countries can come together on very specific challenges, very specific goals and objectives that they want to achieve. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're aligned in all other areas. And I think that we're going to see that. And we already have seen that because you have the Quad itself, but then Quad Plus, bringing in other countries that would not necessarily join in a military arrangement, but at the same time are very concerned particularly about what's happening economically and the fact that China has just not played fair. And they want to counter it, and they want to provide a kind of coherent and cooperative alignment that's going to make a difference.
The convergence around the idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific is what's bringing free nations in the Indo-Pacific together. I've been quite encouraged by that convergence. The visions put forth not only by the United States, but by Japan, reinforced by the new Prime Minister Suga, India, Australia, New Zealand, ASEAN under Indonesia's leadership. These have all been important statements of what the region values out here. And I view it as our job to help knit together those allies and partners, preserve the freedoms that come with that network, certainly ensure that access to the seas, to the skyways, to cyberspace, to space, for those nations interested in cooperating with each other, pursuing their mutual prosperity and security concerns, and working together under the idea that the rules-based international order does the very best for all the nations in the region.
I'm a big student of history, and I am a big navalist when it comes to that history. So George Marshall, iconic figure in the history of the United States, one of our first Secretaries of Defense and the Secretary of State, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo in 1952. And when he received that award, he was asked, how do the Western Allies assure victory in World War III? And he said, well, the only way that we assure victory in World War III is to prevent it, right, through deterrence. And that's where the Navy is so important as that deterrent force. I'm interested to see how China has pivoted to the sea in the last 10 years. There's been an awakening that the PRC has seen that all great powers of the world have always been maritime nations. They seem to have embraced that Mahanian doctrine of turning to the seas. Prior to that, they had been pretty much a land-centric military. Well, they no longer are land-centric. As we speak today, they have more ships than any nation in the world.
Well, in China, basically, there's only one person controls the whole country, 1.4 billion people. And anybody, any voice, which not even against the government, but even just questioning or not on the same line with the party, will be considered as a subversive of a state power, which is pretty strong crime. It could be the biggest crime, political crime, because simply you're going to be disappeared, and nobody can help you. Even the lawyers cannot help you. Government would name a lawyer to work on your case, but basically those lawyers are on the side of the government. So normally you'll disappear half a year or even 1 year. Some disappeared much more than half a year because they can extend the time for so-called investigation. So that kind of punishment, everybody is scared of. Because simply you cannot asking for justice in that nation.
Those are sobering words from Mr. Weiwei, and we just heard a very passionate plea from Emily Lau in Hong Kong. So I'd like to start with the case of the United States. Senator Coons, you're not only a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, but you're also on many people's short list to be the next Secretary of State, including George Will's, which is an accomplishment for a Democrat. Give us and the world community your best analysis, your best prediction of what the next steps we should anticipate from the Biden administration on Hong Kong and generally in the United States posture towards China, militarily, diplomatically, on trade. What are we in for?
Well, Luiza, thank you for those complimentary comments. And I am here as a senator, not on behalf of the president-elect or the transition. But given that I represent the same state the president-elect did for 36 years, and given that I'm a strong and enthusiastic supporter of his, I'll do my best to offer my views on these things. First, we need to restore effective deterrence. We need to be investing in new systems and platforms that allow us to project power in the region more effectively and more sustainably. The comment by our Secretary of the Navy about the significance of naval power is one I take to heart on that front. We also need to re-engage and re-energize our global network of alliances, those who share our core values of democracy, willingness to fight for human rights and for an open press and for the freedoms that we all enjoy and that make us better societies. And to do that, we need to deliver solutions that matter to our own people. So I would expect that you'll see some strong steps to re-engage with the world community promptly. Rejoining, for example, the World Health Organization and joining with other nations in moving quickly to address the pandemic, rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and setting strong steps towards Glasgow and COP26 later this coming year to demonstrate leadership around climate. And frankly, re-engaging around trade. Last Sunday, the signing of the RCEP is a reminder that the United States invested a huge amount of time and effort in building the table, the framework for the TPP, only to have President Trump pull us back from it, and to then watch China take a significant leadership step in setting the rules of the road for global trade for this century. We need to re-engage in that process. The United States needs to be an effective, coordinated, forceful advocate for how democracies and market societies can deliver the results that'll make our own people and our own countries more secure, more prosperous, and free, but to also do that and to lead that effort on behalf of the world society of free societies and democracies. And I expect President-elect Biden will use every ounce of his 8 years as vice president, his 36 years as a senator leading the Foreign Relations Committee to take prompt steps in those directions on defense, on trade, and on the advocacy for democracy and human rights.
What do you think, Senator, will stay the same? Will the tariffs remain in place on China, do you think, under a Biden administration?
I think there are a number of things that need to be re-examined. One of them is our path forward on trade and the tariffs. I would not expect the president-elect to simply just take off all of the tariffs and try and take us back to where we were in 2016. I would expect him to begin by consulting with our close and trusted allies, like the United Kingdom, like Canada, before moving forward. I would not expect to see national security justified tariffs on close and trusted allies as were imposed against Canada and the UK and others, Japan and South Korea, that I think created needless tension in our relationships. But I would expect to see fairly swift movement forward. But we need to confront China. And President Trump was right to make combating China's innovation mercantilism, its structural advantages, and the ways in which it has simply refused to play by the rules of the world order, the WTO and otherwise, and to respect and honor its diplomatic commitments, such as the treaty with the United Kingdom over the status of Hong Kong. I think we first begin by consulting with our trusted allies, strengthening those relationships, and then move forward on issues such as tariffs and trade.
And a final question before we move off of the U.S. case. Do you think that this current administration's resistance to the transition of power that's happening right now in Washington and resistance to accepting the results of this election, is this playing into China's hands? Is this a black eye on democracy around the world?
Absolutely. The peaceful and orderly transition of power is one of the hallmarks of American democracy. We have just concluded a free and fair election in which, although there were significant attempts at interference by foreign powers, they were unsuccessful. There were predictions of chaos at the polling places given the pandemic. Those did not come to pass. We have had among the most secure and fair and open elections in our modern history. And President Trump just fired the individual in his administration responsible for ensuring that they were free and fair. His reluctance, his resistance to the transition, I think, frankly, is tarnishing our reputation as a democracy. And I've been calling on my Republican colleagues to make clear that they see the ways in which this is teaching exactly the wrong lessons about how we practice democracy here in the United States.
Liam Fox, do you agree with that?
I think that voters determine elections, not politicians and not the courts. It's necessary in a democracy for its effective functioning that people know that when they cast their vote, that will be the determinant, and not any ways that that can be subverted. And I hope that there is a smooth transition. The United States needs to, which I think it does, understand that it is the beacon for democracy around the world, and how power is handed over from one administration to another, dependent on the will of the people, is much more important than simply the internal functioning of the United States. It's what it says about the values of democracy to the rest of the world.
Do you agree, Emily Lau? What is the perspective in Hong Kong? Are people looking at this election and is this tarnishing the reputation of democracy?
Well, I guess you wouldn't believe it. We have such acrimonious debate and argument in Hong Kong. It's really quite crazy. There are many people who do not support the Communist Party, and they think that President Trump is the best thing since sliced bread. And they are very fearful that President Biden may be very weak, and his son and the family may have ties with the Chinese and may be corrupt. So there have been so many arguments here, which I find really crazy. So in the end, I said, you don't have a vote, I don't have a vote, let's shut up. But of course, I agree. And I don't want to see leaders lying every day on television and all that. But somehow, I think some Hong Kong people are so upset with their current state of affairs, and they think some strong man will be able to help them. So, but I think there are reasonable people in Hong Kong and elsewhere. And I certainly hope the new president can work with the free world, with democracies, and to try to get China, President Xi Jinping, to act in a reasonable way.
Emily Lau, what is one specific thing that is at the top of your list that you would like to see the Biden administration do to help Hong Kong's democracy movement?
Well, as I said, Hong Kong people are very frightened because they are afraid that they could get arrested for saying the wrong things, for doing the wrong things. So if President Biden, and I don't think it's just President Biden, I think it's President Biden working with other countries, and he has said that himself. And I think that is very important to show it's not just America, but Europe and other countries which believe in all these core values, and they all work together and show China that this is how they want China to behave and to keep the promises of an international treaty. So I certainly hope that the free world, the democracies, President Biden, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and elsewhere, they can do that so that Hong Kong people will not be so frightened, will not think that, there will be a knock on the door at 3 a.m. and they will come and arrest us and maybe even send us to mainland China. So these are the fears of millions of people in Hong Kong. And we hope not just President Biden, but democracies can see that. And if you can help Hong Kong, you can tell the world, see, there are big challenges and we can work together to face those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Liam Fox, speaking of democracies other than the United States, you were on the short list to be WTO Director General. You know about trade. We've just had the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership born, 15 countries, world's biggest trading bloc, including China, but also including countries like Japan and Australia. Should democratic countries be entering into trade agreements with China, given its well-demonstrated track record of skirting rules around intellectual property, around labor rights, around environmental standards, and around subsidies? I mean, the list is long. Is this the way to go? Does trade engagement actually play into their hands?
I think you have to think about it in a multi-layered approach. That if you accept, as I do, that the aim of China, whether stated or not, is to make the world a more permissive place for totalitarianism and non-market views of economics, then we have to make the world more permissive for freedom and democracy, rule of law, and market systems. So that's where we have to come in, setting a positive agenda. I agree entirely with Senator Coons that in terms of deterrence, classical deterrence militarily, but also deterrence in cyberspace, we're in a war of the invisible enemy, and we need to be able to respond adequately, because cyber theft of our IP is one of the key ways in which China has been making up the deficit on the most developed innovative economies. Then we do come to these wider trading agreements, and I think we need to see the trading agreements as part of a strategic engagement. If you look at the very narrow confines of the WTO, China has actually not been bad at following the rules that exist inside the WTO. The trouble is that the WTO rules were set in 1995 for a very different era, and they were set for market economies who behaved in a certain way. The problem is that we don't have the rules that are there to deal with some of the problems we face with China today, notably the lack of transparency in their economic dealings. What is a
may I just ask, does China even belong in the WTO?
Well, there are a lot of people who took the view that when China joined the WTO, it would gradually move into a much more market economy status, that it would gradually conform more with the rules. And yet there are now those who say this is a different and totally different model of an economy which should be given equal acceptance by the global community. Now, the WTO was set up for market economies and for democratic capitalist economies to be able to cooperate and to diminish the barriers between them. But we now have problems in relation with China, with market access issues, but particularly with transparency issues, where the rules are not there. And either we develop the rules, which have to then be followed, or there is a real question about whether the WTO can exist. At the time of the leadership contest, I said it was in an existential crisis, and nothing that has happened since has made me change my mind. And if we don't have a rules-based international system, then we will find that the alternatives are even less palatable.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the wonderful things about the Halifax Forum are the audience and the questions that we get. So I'm going to share a few of those that have been coming in. For Senator Coons, China has asserted itself in Africa through extensive financial investments. Should the United States shift resources from military intervention to economic statecraft? Why or why not, and to what extent?
Absolutely. In the years that I was the chair of the African Affairs Subcommittee, I visited countries all over the continent, and I was struck at how quickly and how broadly China was replacing the United States as the investment partner of preference, the trading partner of preference. The United States has had a response to and an engagement with Africa and African development that prioritized grants and public health a decade or more ago. And we have moved in recent years. I have helped introduce, write, lead, and get signed into law by President Obama and President Trump several new tools in our toolkit that will allow us to coordinate with our market society partners and allies, and allow us to compete with Belt and Road style investment in infrastructure by China, and to show that it is possible to develop and develop well on the continent with projects that are more transparent, that are more respectful of labor and environmental standards, and that are more sustainable. So,
but respectfully, Senator, how can the United States compete with Chinese Belt and Road infrastructure projects if can't even get infrastructure bills passed domestically?
Well, we actually have turned into law something called the Development Finance Corporation that has robust resources and has just rolled out its first round of significant investments across the continent of Africa. For some reasons, and it is puzzling, it is easier for us to do foreign policy and capital investment and projects overseas than it is for us to resolve these disputes here at home.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just, if I may just come in on that, because having visited a lot of African countries in recent years, their experience of Belt and Road hasn't always been a positive one. Many of them are saying that the infrastructure that has been built, often by Chinese companies bringing their own labor force with them, has not been up to an adequate standard. And there's a lot of resentment, I think, developing about countries that have now found themselves having to replace second-rate infrastructure projects while they're still in debt to the Chinese government. So I think that there are problems there. One of the things that we need to do, if we want to counter that, is to make our markets more open to some of these developing countries. Back at the end of the financial crisis in 2009, only 0.7% of the imports of G20 countries were covered by restrictive measures. That is now 10.3%. That means that while we've been talking about giving aid and China's been involved in Belt and Road, the biggest economies in the world have actually been closing down their markets in terms of access to a lot of these developing countries. We need to look at that element of it as well. It's not just about aid. It's also allowing countries to trade their way out of poverty by having open markets and a diminution of the protectionism that we've seen in recent times.
Mm-hmm. And so going back to this question that we started with, which is how will democracies work together to counter some of these challenges, where do each of you see the forum for that? And who is leading? Is this a G7, OECD? Is this the D10? What do you see as the significant forum leadership and time in the next 12 months? Anybody?
Well, there's two places where we're going to have an obvious and clear opportunity. One is the G7 as it transitions from being US-led to being UK-led, for us to have a real and open conversation about how we're going to drive not just pandemic response, but economic recovery in a way that can and should include the global South. And then second is Glasgow, as we move towards COP26. There are opportunities here for the UK and US in close partnership with our critical, as you put it, D10 partners and allies, to set the standard for how we're going to move forward together to respond to the pandemic, to recover from this recession, but to also restore some of the progress towards the SDGs that has been lost in the last year. If we're going to make it as a world community of democracies, this is an absolutely pivotal year where President-elect Biden and American leadership can contribute to reimagining and restoring some of the critical infrastructure of the last 7 decades of the global world order that we all built together after the Second World War. There are a few places and moments when it will be most important for us to be visible, and I will be working hard to make sure that America's participation in those moments is bipartisan and sustainable.
I certainly hope President Biden, President-elect, will work with his allies, with many countries, which I heard have breathed a sigh of relief when they found out that he's won the election. And there are, if there is another forum that America can create, work with the European Union, with Australia, with other countries, which I think are of like mind. So I certainly hope, because there are doubters in Hong Kong who think that the president-elect is too soft. And I hope that he will come out and show us that he has the leadership and he can inspire not just his own people, but the democratic international community. And as you rightly said, in the next 12 months, take some actions which will make us say, wow, America and the free world is trying to do something to confront the problems.
Emily Lau, are you concerned that President Biden will be too soft?
Well, because there have been so many stories about it, and every time when I take part in any online forum, I always raise this question, and I hope, Senator Coons has heard it, and I hope other, advisors of President-elect have heard it. Maybe if they're wrong, and I hope that he will come not just to disprove it, but to show. And many people are looking for American leadership, and we hope that it will come as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. What does too soft look like? What is the right response? What is a too soft response from your perspective?
Well, that means they will just concentrate on trade, and I think many people understand that money speaks very loudly, whether it's in politics, in business, in academia, and China has a lot of money to spend, whether it is in America, in the UK, in Europe, and other places. So people can be bought, and whether it's politicians or others. So we certainly hope that I'm not against people doing business, no way. But I think there are also other values. So you have to weigh them up, and don't let people think, well, you are just like the rest, always kowtowing to Mammon. We certainly hope, we don't want to see that.
Senator Coons, what comfort can you give Emily Lau that this won't be a case of selling out to big business interests interested in doing business with China, business as usual?
I've known President-elect Biden for 30 years, and I've seen him over a long career in public service as a senator, as our vice president, and on the campaign trail. And he is someone who, in his gut, understands the significance of fighting for freedom, for human rights, and for open societies. and has not hesitated to stand up and to fight for the values that actually define us as a country. President Trump bluntly has engaged in a diplomatic effort that is more bluster than reality, that is more Twitter than it is truth. And I know that Joe and the state that we both have represented and represent believes deeply in the core values of democracy. That's what we have fought for on the world stage over and over in contests in the last century. And those are the core issues that animate him and will animate those of us in Congress who will come together. I am convinced that we recognize as a nation that this is a pivotal moment in our history and in world history. And I am absolutely certain that he will be as tough on China as is essential to secure our place of leadership in the world as the preeminent democracy in the 21st century.
Liam Fox, just this week, the Five Eyes countries, so Australia, Britain, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States, denounced the expulsion of 4 opposition legislators from Hong Kong's Legislative Assembly. And these were the words in response of China's foreign ministry spokesman. He warned the Five Eyes countries not to, quote, get their eyes poked out. What is the thinking now among this alliance of 5 countries about what is next? What steps can we expect from the UK and from the Five Eyes alliance?
Well, all these statements from China are to test our resolve. They're all being designed to see what it is we will do in response. Of these 4 lawmakers, hardly revolutionaries, an accountant, 2 lawyers and a doctor from the Civic Party. They would be in the middle of any mainstream party in our countries. So we do have, especially in the United Kingdom, a right under international law to have a very strong opinion on this. We were guaranteed until 2047, 1 country, 2 systems. The current Chinese government have driven a coach and horses through that, which makes all of us wonder what is the value of a Chinese signature on a treaty. That has to be one of the key issues. And of course, our response needs to be a very firm and practical one. When it comes to the Five Eyes, we have to, for example, be able to guarantee free navigation of international waters, including the South China Sea. There can be no-go areas for us in there. So we have to maintain our military levels of spending. We have to have classical deterrence. We have to work together in areas such as cyberspace, where we are being threatened at the present time. And we need to develop our doctrine as well as our capabilities to deal with that. And then I'd love to see the United States come back to what is now CPTPP, because I believe it's much more than a trading organization. I think it's a statement of strategic intent. And I hope that we can see the US government come back to that, as incidentally, I would like to see the United Kingdom accede to that, because again, it sets in a very clear and practical way the value we place on markets as part of our strategic relationship between families of nations with similar values. All of these, there's no silver bullet here. There are a range of issues where we can cooperate better together to ensure that we set limits on what has been an extension of Chinese power and influence in recent time.
Mm-hmm. Emily Lau, have you heard anything here today that makes you think that 2021 will be any different than 2020?
Well, I guess we have to live in hope. I refuse to give up and say the game is over. For me, it will never be over. And me, I'm like a bad penny. I'll keep turning up until I'm arrested and thrown into jail. But I certainly hope that the new president in America and the UK is a former colonial power. UK has very big responsibility for Hong Kong. They signed a joint declaration to guarantee that we have free lifestyle until 2047. So we have the 2 gentlemen sitting here, and I hope they will take the message home and work with all your allies.
Well, let's
persuade, to cajole, to get China to do the reasonable thing.
Thank you. Let's conclude then on that message of hope for the coming year and for the new international landscape with a new U.S. administration. I'd like to thank our panelists, Emily Lau, Senator Chris Coons, and Liam Fox for joining us. Thank you to our audience and to the organizers. And we look forward to the next panel.
Well, Peter Van Prague, now is the time where we present the Halifax Builders Award. The Builders Award. You want me to? Am I starting again? Okay. Now is the time that we present the Halifax Builders Award. The Builder Award recognizes those who have been instrumental to the success of HFX and its mission to enhance security cooperation among the world's democracies. It is my honor to award the 2020 Builders Award to Canada's Chief of Defence Staff, General Jonathan Vance. General Vance recognized immediately the importance of bringing the democratic world together in Halifax. His visionary leadership on advancing the roles of women in the Canadian Forces led to our program, the Peace with Women Fellowship. His contributions have helped HFX grow in size, scope, and influence. As Canada's Chief of Defence, he exemplifies what this award is all about. I'm so proud that he joins a list of other individuals and organizations that have contributed to Halifax International Security Forum's success. They include General Natinchuk, Senator John McCain, and Senator Udall, CEO of Meg Energy, Bill McCaffrey, former Defense Minister Peter MacKay, Senator Tim Kaine, NATO, Senator Jean Shaheen, and ATCO CEO and Chairman Nancy Southern. I am so proud to award the 2020 Halifax International Security Forum Builders Award to General Jonathan Vance. General, thank you so much.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Peter, for the kind words. To you and all of the organizers of this year's forum, thank you and well done. It takes a lot of work to make a virtual event like this successful, and you should be proud of overcoming the challenges posed by the pandemic. I'm extremely honored and humbled, surprised, to be selected as this year's recipient of the Halifax Builder Award. It's an honor to join the impressive list of previous recipients from industry, civil society, and NATO. It's been my utmost pleasure to support and participate in the Halifax International Security Forum since its inception in 2011 as an independent body. And this is my 6th time, and my last as Canada's Chief of the Defence Staff. Although you can be sure that I intend to continue being part of this excellent community well into the future. This forum provides such a valuable opportunity to exchange ideas about the most pressing concerns in defense, security, and international diplomacy. It challenges us to have nuanced and comprehensive discussions on issues such as climate change, great power competition, developments in the space and cyber domains, and democracy itself. Each time that I have participated in panels, I've enjoyed the thought-provoking discussions. From the changing nature of terrorism, to the importance of multilateralism, to advancing the women, peace, and security agenda, I have thoroughly appreciated the opportunity to engage in dialogue on the HISF stage. And it has been rewarding to see the growth and progress of the Peace with Women Fellowship since its creation in 2018. And Peter, I can never thank you enough for that. I know that it was not an easy decision to postpone the fellowship until next year, but it was the right one, and I am confident that the two cohorts will benefit greatly from the experience, just as their predecessors have. HISF bridges gaps and recognizes that no single actor has all of the answers in today's complex, interconnected, and heavily contested world. For years, there was a myth that the application of military force, for example, was a discrete option for government, something that was fenced off and self-isolated from other instruments of national power. That was never really the case, was it? And it is most certainly not true in today's operating environment. More and more, the Canadian Armed Forces operates as part of a whole-of-government approach to conflict, defense, and security. That approach includes, of course, our partners in other government departments and agencies. It's also about being better coordinated with industry to find creative solutions and ensure that we are equipped for the challenges we face now and into the future. Looking outside of Canada, we work shoulder to shoulder with our NATO allies and international partners to promote security and stability and to defend the rules-based international order. And we are working closely with our neighbors to determine the path forward for the modernization of NORAD and continental defense. Silos and unilateral thought are anathema to our success. And HISF is about collaboration. It's about enhancing our collective understanding. It's about strengthening strategic cooperation. That is the tremendous value of this forum. Over the years, I've had the pleasure of talking with and hearing from government, political, military, academic, and business leaders. I have been enriched by the experience, and it has been such a privilege for me to contribute to HISF. Thank you once more for the honor that you've bestowed upon me. I look forward to seeing how this forum continues to play an important role in advancing international security in the years to come. Well done, HISF, and long may you contribute to this important dialogue.
General Vance has been such a great supporter of Halifax, and I'm so delighted that he's got the award this year, which he so richly deserves. Once again, it's a pity we're not in Halifax. Most of us remember with such great affection that city and that hotel. There's a small socially distanced grouping, though, joining us from the home of the annual forum, the Westin Nova Scotian, as I call it, the good ship Westin, will now go live to Halifax with Mayor Mike Savage and MP Andy Fillmore.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Savage, and I'm the mayor of Halifax, usually the host of this forum here in the land called Mi'kma'ki, which is the traditional and unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people. And we're here at the wonderful Westin Hotel that so many of you know well. For a dozen years, we've been hosting the Halifax International Security Forum. And we owe a great debt of gratitude to former Defense and Foreign Affairs Minister Peter MacKay, without whom this never would have happened. And I also want to acknowledge the leadership of Canada's current government, Minister Sajan, local MP Andy Fillmore, and others. For the last number of years, we have had so many important guests come to Halifax. We have had leading politicians and government leaders, business leaders, military leaders, academics and scholars, legal leaders. In fact, this forum has come to be known by some as the Davos of international security. Of course, you'll understand if I refer to Davos as the Halifax of economic forums. But this has been a great event for Halifax to hold. We've had the Builders Award, we've had the John McCain Prize for Peace, the Women for Peace Fellowship, and this has been focused on making the world a better place. And right now, we're all trying to do this through COVID. So I want to commend the forum's organizers, Peter von Prague, Laura Bridge, and the whole team for pulling this off in the way that we have to this year. I know it'll be worthwhile, but I gotta say, I look forward to welcoming you all back to Halifax next year. Our old port city has a lot of hospitality that many of you have already recognized, and many of you will for the first time next year. So come to Halifax next year. In the meantime, we all wish you the very best. And I do hope that we can survive COVID together if we all pull together and do what we need to do. I'll see you next year for a really important debate, dialogue, discussion of challenges, and next year, a little bit of lobster too. All the best. Thank you very much. Enjoy the forum.
It's always so great to see our friends in Halifax, and vaccine permitting, we will indeed be in Halifax next year. But for now, we're excited to bring you the amazing footage from the interviews that you already got a glimpse of. Oh, and we've actually got, which is another nice little addition to today's proceedings, we can go back to Halifax for local MP Andy Fillmore.
Thanks, Robin. It's nice to be here in Halifax again. My name is Andy Fillmore. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. Kwe. I am the Member of Parliament for Halifax, capital city of Nova Scotia, and the host to the Halifax International Security Forum. Well, this year's forum looks a lot different than we expected, but I want to give a special thanks and commendation to the Halifax International Security Forum team for quickly making the transition to virtual. I'd also like to commend and thank the incredible hospitality and dedication of the team here at the Westin Nova Scotian for making the best of this forum even in the most unusual of times. On behalf of the people of Halifax and to all of us joining from around the world, we look forward to welcoming you back to Halifax next year. Year after year, in fact, for 12 years now, this forum has been one of the world's leading gatherings of democratic leaders committed to global security and prosperity. We're living in a time when global cooperation is vital to each of our nation's individual successes, and it's only by working together that we'll be able to tackle the most urgent crisis of this moment, like fighting the spread of COVID-19, curbing climate change, ending the suffering of persecuted groups around the world, and maintaining peace, order, and good government. Canada, for its part, is ready to work alongside our allies to make progress on these issues and many others. And to this end, I'm thrilled that our city, Halifax, can host this unique opportunity for us to chart the path forward together. I look forward to our discussions over the coming days and looking forward to seeing you all in person here in Halifax next year. Until then, stay safe. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Jalasi.
Thanks. That's absolutely terrific. Thanks to Mayor Savage and MP Andy Fillmore. It's so good to see our friends in Halifax, and we will say next year in Halifax. But for now, we're excited to bring you the amazing footage from the interviews that you've already got a glimpse of today. We'll be showing them in full on our website. And please tune in tomorrow for more excellent conversations with thought leaders from around the world. But for today, it's goodbye from me.